Analysis of Les Misérables, the call of the era in Les Misérables. How can a loaf of bread alter a life, or a candlestick ignite the light of humanity? Victor Hugo's Les Misérables is not just a novel but a mirror reflecting 19th century French society and human nature. Published in 1862, this masterpiece follows Jean Valjean's path to redemption, weaving together the struggles of the downtrodden, moral dilemmas, and the tides of history, while probing eternal questions of justice and love. Born in 1802, Hugo lived through the turmoil following the French Revolution, evolving from a romantic poet to an exiled writer, using his pen as a sword to critique social injustice and champion human goodness. Les Misérables emerged during Napoleonic Second Empire, a time of stark wealth gaps, rigid class structures, worker uprisings, and political oppression, while Hugo, exiled on Guernsey in the English Channel, witnessed the plight of the poor and resolved to blend individual fates with the heir's lament. Hugo's exile was not only a political choice but a catalyst for his intellectual growth. In 1851, Napoleonic's coup led to Hugo's public condemnation of his dictatorship, forcing him to flee France, moving through Belgium and Jersey before settling in Guernsey. At his Hauteville house on the island, facing the sea, with waves crashing outside his study, Hugo was inspired to reflect deeply on human destiny. During his exile, he observed the harsh lives of Guernsey's fishermen, such as a widow named Emma Leclerc, who drowned while fishing to feed her 3 sons, a tragedy eerily similar to Fantine's fate. Hugo wrote in his diary, "Poverty is humanity's common enemy." This insight drove him to expand Les Misérables from a single redemption story into a comprehensive critique of social ills. He not only condemned France's class oppression but also addressed Britain's child labor issues and Ireland's famine, showing a humanitarian concern that transcended borders. The solitude of exile deepened Hugo's reliance on literary expression. On Guernsey, he revisited his early concept for Les Misérables, tracing Jean Valjean's prototype to Pierre Morin, a French prisoner from 1801 who stole bread and was later freed for good deeds. Through letters with friends, Hugo described the book as an epic written for the suffering. He was also influenced by contemporary thinkers like Victor Brahm, whose Secrets of Paris exposed the underclass, inspiring Hugo's vivid depiction of Paris's sewers. Over 19 years of exile, Hugo shifted from romantic fervor to a deeper sense of social responsibility, making Les Misérables a monumental work confronting humanity and history. The 19th century in France was a time of upheaval. The aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars, the July Revolution of 1830, and the February Revolution of 1848 shaped an era of both hope and despair. The underclass, like Jean Valjean, faced harsh laws and social injustice, sentenced to 19 years of hard labor for stealing a loaf of bread. Through the novel, Hugo reveals how poverty drives good people into the abyss and how redemption can lead to rebirth. Contemporary writers like Balzac and Old Goriot depicted Paris's greed, while Dickens, in A Tale of Two Cities, portrayed the cruelty of revolution, but Hugo's distinction lies in his romantic passion, elevating individual suffering into a universal concern for humanity. He wrote in the book, "Human destinies are equal, but human conditions are not." This line is not only the soul of the novel, but also an indictment of its era. Hugo's background provides a key to understanding the work. Initially a monarchist, his opposition to Napoleon III led to exile, transforming his views from conservative to radical. Les Misérables is not just a literary work but a call for social reform. Through characters like Jean Valjean, Fantine, and Cosette, the novel spans from the underclass to the aristocracy, from prisons to barricades, encompassing love, sacrifice, justice, and revolution. This chapter will explore the novel's depth through 4 lenses: characters, symbols, history, and philosophy, guiding readers into Hugo's tragic yet hopeful world. 2. Interwoven fates, a gallery of characters. The core allure of Les Misérables lies in its vivid cast of characters, each like a star shining against the backdrop of the era, intertwining to compose a symphony of human tragedy and triumph. Jean Valjean, the protagonist, evolves from a poor man stealing bread to the Mayor Madeleine and finally a self-sacrificing hero, his arc illuminating the entire novel. Initially, he stole a loaf to feed his sister's 7 children, earning a 5-year sentence that stretched to 19 due to escape attempts. After his release, starving and desperate, he was taken in by Bishop Muriel, but stole his silver. The bishop's forgiveness marked a turning point. Hugo writes, Jean Valjean felt his soul torn by a powerful force. In that moment, he transformed from a despairing convict into a seeker of redemption. Jean Valjean's change was not instantaneous, but a long struggle of the soul. Even after the bishop's mercy, he did not become good immediately, lingering at a moral crossroads. He stole a 40-sou coin from a street urchin, Petit Gervais, plunging himself into deep remorse. Hugo writes, he felt himself a monster. This scene reveals that humanity is not black and white, but a complex spectrum of good and evil. Jean Valjean's inner turmoil echoes French philosopher Rousseau's words in Confessions, the human heart is a battlefield of good and evil. He returned the coin and resolved to change, marking the start of his redemption. This psychological shift recalls a real 19th century figure, Jean Valjean, a possible inspiration of French peasant jailed for theft who, with charity's aid, became a small merchant. His story shows that social support and personal repentance are equally vital. Jean Valjean's transformation is also seen in his contributions as Madeleine in Montreuil, improving leatherworking, building factories, and funding hospitals, creating a ripple effect of good. Yet, he always bore the convict stigma, like Sisyphus in Greek myth, pushing a boulder he could never escape. Jean Valjean's complexity shines in his fatherly love for Cosette, adopted both to repay Fantine's debt and to fill his own emptiness. This mirrors George Eliot's Silas Marner, where the protagonist finds meaning through adopting an orphan girl. Jean Valjean's love is imperfect, his jealousy of Marius and eventual letting go revealing a blend of selfishness and selflessness, making him one of literature's most multi-dimensional characters. Fantine's tragedy exposes the helplessness of women. A Paris factory worker abandoned by her lover, she raised Cosette alone, resorting to prostitution to pay for her care, and died of tuberculosis. Her story recalls real 19th century French figures like Marie Duplessis, a Parisian courtesan who died young of poverty and disease, inspiring Dumas's The Lady of the Camellias. Fantine's plight is not just personal but a reflection of 19th century French women's struggles. Paris's industrialization drew rural women to the city, but low wages and gender discrimination left them vulnerable. Historian Louis Chevalier, in Labor and Poverty in Paris, notes that in the 1830s, female workers earned just 1 franc daily, far less than men, and faced exploitation. Abandoned, Fantine entrusted Cosette to the Thénardiers who extorted her, forcing her to sell her hair, teeth, and body, a descent reflecting women's powerlessness in a patriarchal society. Similar women abounded historically, like Louise Morel in 1820s Paris, widowed by war, raising 4 children as a laundress, and dying of cholera. Her diary, Longing for Her Daughter, mirrors Fantine's devotion to Cosette. Hugo uses Fantine to critique society's double standards. Men abandon families without blame, while women bear shame. Fantine's song, I Dreamed a Dream, becomes her spiritual refuge, akin to Baudelaire's Flowers of Evil, where women seek dignity in despair. Fantine's sacrifice is not just personal tragedy but Hugo's indictment of gender injustice. Fantine's sacrifice paves a path of hope for Cosette, embodying Hugo's tribute to motherly love. Cosette's journey from an abused childhood to love with Marius symbolizes a transition from darkness to light, mirroring France's hope for freedom from oppression. Javert represents the cold rigidity of the law. A policeman, he pursues Jean Valjean relentlessly, believing convicts can never reform. His obsession recalls Joseph Fouché, Napoleon's ruthless police chief, enforcing order without human warmth. Javert's suicide, unable to reconcile his inner conflict, underscores the clash between rigid law and human redemption. Other characters like Marius, the idealistic revolutionary youth, the greedy, cunning Thénardiers, reflecting society's dark side, and Gavroche, the street boy whose humor and sacrifice light up humanity, enrich the tapestry. These characters are not isolated. Their fates intertwine in Paris's streets, prisons, and barricades. Through multi-threaded storytelling, Hugo makes each character's choices and struggles a microcosm of the era. Jean Valjean's courtroom confession, sacrificing his mayoral identity to save an innocent man, recalls Madame Roland of the French Revolution, guillotined for her principles. This gallery of characters drives the plot and reveals humanity's resilience and radiance amid suffering. 3. Bread and candlesticks, the power of symbols. In Les Misérables, bread and silver candlesticks are more than props, they are symbols of humanity and redemption. Bread represents the struggle for survival. Jean Valjean's theft of a loaf, leading to hard labor, shows how poverty pushes people to crime. Hugo writes, "He did not steal bread, but society itself." This loaf symbolizes the hunger and despair of the underclass, akin to Britain's 19th century bread riots, where workers protested soaring grain prices. Bread is not just a physical need, but a symbol of social injustice, with Hugo condemning the law's cruel punishment of the poor. Silver candlesticks symbolize redemption and hope. Bishop Muriel gives them to Jean Valjean, urging him to use them to become an honest man. Their glow represents faith and human goodness, illuminating Jean Valjean's soul. This echoes the Christian imagery of light in John's Gospel. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The bishop's forgiveness parallels Saint Martin, who shared his cloak with a beggar, embodying selfless love. The candlesticks recur throughout, with Jean Valjean gazing at them in his final moments, symbolizing his completed redemption. The Paris sewers are another key symbol, representing society's underbelly and the arduous path to redemption. Jean Valjean carries the wounded Marius through the sewers to escape the barricades massacre, a scene of both physical and spiritual trial. Sewers, filthy and chaotic, mirror Hugo's depiction of the marginalized, filled with forgotten suffering. Historian Victor Brahm noted that 19th century Paris sewers were not just drainage systems, but hideouts for the pursued poor. The sewer's symbolic weight transcends their physical role, serving as Hugo's metaphor for society's fringes. In the early 19th century, Paris's urbanization worsened sanitation crises, with sewers breeding disease and crime. The 1830 cholera outbreak killed 18,000, spurring sewer reforms, yet the poor still use them as refuges. Hugo devotes a chapter to the sewers, calling them the intestines of Paris, both foul and vital. This recalls Henry Mayhew's London Labour and the London Poor, documenting sewer scavengers surviving on refuse, akin to Paris's underclass. Jean Valjean's sewer journey to save Marius symbolizes a grueling passage from darkness to light. The sewer's labyrinthine structure reflects society's complexity. Paris's glittering surface hides forgotten suffering. Hugo's depiction draws on engineer Pierre Brunceau, who led 1832 sewer reforms and recorded workers' sacrifices. Brunceau's notes mention a worker, Charles Duval, killed in a collapse, whose dying words were, "Tell my children Paris will be cleaner." This unsung heroism echoes Jean Valjean's quiet sacrifices. The sewers also carry cultural metaphors. In French literature, they often symbolize suppressed truths, as in Dumas's The Count of Monte Cristo, where underground passages stage revenge. Hugo imbues the sewers with redemptive meaning, as Jean Valjean emerges, proving hope shines even in the darkest places. This symbolism makes the sewer scene a narrative climax, amplifying the novel's social critique. Through the sewers, Hugo illustrates the tortuous path of redemption and the glimmer of hope. These symbols are not mere narrative tools, but metaphors for humanity and society. They make abstract moral questions tangible, letting readers feel profound emotional and philosophical impacts through the story. 4. Personal struggles in the tide of history. Les Misérables spans 1815 to 1832, covering the post-Napoleonic Bourbon Restoration and the July Revolution's turmoil. Hugo places individual fates within history's sweep, showing how eras shape and crush people. The Napoleonic Wars left France scarred, with the Restoration's conservative policies widening wealth gaps. Jean Valjean's hard labor began in 1815, during the Bourbon Restoration, when harsh laws left the poor hopeless. Hugo writes, "Laws and customs created a hell." This echoes historian Tocqueville's observation. Restoration France seemed prosperous but hit a crisis. The June 1832 uprising is the novel's historical climax. Marius and the ABC Society's revolutionary youth build barricades in Paris to resist the July monarchy's oppression. Though the uprising failed, it reflected the people's yearning for freedom. Historically, the June Rebellion was small, but foreshadowed the 1848 revolution. The July 1830 revolution, transitioning France from Bourbon Restoration to July monarchy, set the stage. In 1824, Charles X's ultra-conservative policies, like compensating nobles for revolutionary losses and curbing press freedom, angered the rising bourgeoisie and workers. In July 1830, Paris citizens, outraged by Charles X's dissolution of Parliament, toppled the Bourbon dynasty in 3 days, establishing Louis Philippe's July monarchy. This revolution seemed progressive, but entrenched bourgeois power, leaving workers and the poor empty-handed. Historian Fernand Furet in France in 1830 notes, "The July Revolution was a bourgeois victory, but the hopes of the masses were dashed." This disillusionment fueled the June 1832 rebellion. The novel's ABC Society members, like Enjolras and Marius, embody republican and idealistic resistance. Their barricade fight recalls real figures like student leader Charles Jean, who rallied against oppression in 1830 and died in battle. Hugo shows how idealism falters against reality. The July Revolution's legacy appears in social divides. The wealthy, like Marius's grandfather Gillenormand, backed the new monarchy, while the poor, like Gavroche, fought for freedom on the streets. Hugo's view on revolution is nuanced. He supports liberty but fears violence's cost. He writes in Les Misérables, "Revolution is humanity's convulsion, painful yet necessary." This recalls Tocqueville's The Old Regime and the Revolution, arguing revolutions stem from injustice but often breed new oppression. The July Revolution's complexity gives the novel historical depth, linking personal struggles to social change. Through barricade scenes, Hugo captures the clash of idealism and reality, as when Gavroche sings amid gunfire, evoking young Paris Commune fighters who died for their beliefs. Through Jean Valjean, Hugo shows individual helplessness and resistance in history's tide. From convict to mayor, he tries to integrate into society, but flees Javert's pursuit. This struggle resembles Robespierre, who drove revolutionary change but was cast aside by history's limits. Through these characters, Hugo reveals individuals' smallness and greatness in history's flow, urging social reform to reduce tragedy. The eternal questions of morality and redemption. The core theme of Les Misérables is morality and redemption. Jean Valjean's redemption begins with the bishop's forgiveness and runs through the novel. At key moments, he faces choices: confess to save an innocent man, spare his pursuer Javert. Each decision tests his humanity. Hugo writes, "Conscience is God's presence in us." This echoes Kant's moral philosophy: an action's moral worth lies not in its outcome but in its motive. Jean Valjean's choices, driven by inner goodness, reflect a moral force beyond utility. Javert's tragedy stems from moral rigidity. He sees the law as the sole standard, unable to accept Jean Valjean's change, and collapses under the conflict. Javert's prototype may be Vidocq, a French ex-convict turned detective, torn between law and humanity. Javert's obsession is not just personal but rooted in a religious faith in the law as sacred order, viewing criminals as irredeemable. This traces to 18th century French jurist Jean-Jacques Brisset, who in on-criminal law advocated harsh penalties for stability. Javert's upbringing, born in prison to a fortune-teller mother and convict father, fueled his self-loathing and loyalty to the police. Hugo writes, "Javert was the law's dog, loyal and merciless." This metaphor reveals his tragedy of subordinating humanity to rules. Javert's psyche recalls Hegel's ethical state, where individuals must obey the state's will. He cannot accept Jean Valjean's goodness, as it shakes his worldview. While pursuing him, Javert gazes over Paris from Montmartre, wrestling internally: is the law wrong? In that moment, he nears humanity, but is consumed by rigidity. Similar figures like Fouquier Tinville, the French Revolution's ruthless prosecutor, collapsed when doubts arose. Javert's suicide marks his conflict's peak. After sparing Jean Valjean, unable to reconcile law and humanity, he leaps into the Seine. Hugo uses this to critique the law's mechanical nature, echoing Bentham's utilitarianism. Laws should aim for the greatest happiness, not blind punishment. Javert's tragedy reminds us that moral judgment must transcend rules to embrace human complexity. Javert's rigidity prompts reflection. When law and justice conflict, what should one choose? Through Javert, Hugo critiques the coldness of mechanical law enforcement. Fantine and Cosette's mother-daughter bond shows love's redemptive power. Fantine sacrifices everything for her daughter, her love warming Cosette's life like the candlesticks. This recalls Margaret Sanders, a 19th century British woman who toiled as a factory worker to save her children, dying of exhaustion. Through these characters, Hugo explores how love and sacrifice counter suffering, kindling hope. The moral question extends to society. Is a society that forces the poor to crime itself guilty? Hugo writes, "The greatest evil is ignorance." This aligns with thinker Charles Fourier, who argued society should eradicate poverty through education and fairness, not punishment. VI. Hugo's craft, romanticism and realism. Hugo's narrative skill is why Les Misérables became a classic. He blends romanticism and realism, creating a text both passionately vibrant and deeply authentic. Multi-threaded storytelling is his core technique, with Jean Valjean, Javert, and Cosette stories interwoven like Bach's polyphonic music, each thread distinct yet harmonious. When depicting Jean Valjean's flight, Hugo inserts a lengthy discourse on Paris's sewers, seemingly off-topic but deepening social critique and revealing the underclass's reality. Psychological depth is another strength. Jean Valjean's struggle before confessing is detailed over pages, his soul wavered between two abysses. This depth recalls Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, using inner monologues to reveal human complexity. Hugo's use of contrast, like Javert's coldness versus the bishop's mercy, forms moral poles, amplifying thematic impact. His language brims with romantic passion and metaphor. Describing the June Uprising's barricade battle, he writes, "It was the spark of ideals mingled with the blood of reality." This poetic style echoes Shelley's Ode to the West Wind, passionately calling for change. Hugo's realism shines in precise social details, like the Thénardier's filthy inn or Paris's impoverished streets, starkly vivid. This fusion of romanticism and realism makes Les Misérables both an artwork and a social document. Through his craft, Hugo balances emotional resonance and rational reflection for readers. Epilogue: the contemporary echoes of Les Misérables. Though born in the 19th century, Les Misérables transcends time, its themes still resonant. Jean Valjean's redemption reminds us that kindness and forgiveness can transform lives, like Nelson Mandela, who, after 27 years in prison, chose reconciliation to lead South Africa anew. Javert's rigidity warns that blind rule following can distort humanity, relevant in today's debates on law and ethics, like AI's moral boundaries. The novel's critique of social injustice echoes current issues of wealth gaps and social justice. Hugo's Parisian streets resemble today's global urban poverty. A 2023 report states 700 million people still live in extreme poverty, making Hugo's outcry enduring. Cosette and Marius's love prompts reflection on love's redemptive power. As psychologist Fromm writes in The Art of Love, love is the act of power to give. Hugo concludes, as long as ignorance and poverty exist, Les Misérables will not vanish. This remains true today. A 2022 International Labour Organization report notes 160 million child labourers, many forced to work due to poverty, like Rajni Patil in Mumbai, India, labouring at 12 in a brick factory to pay her mother's debts, echoing Jean Valjean's bread theft. Education and fairness remain key to breaking poverty's cycle, as Hugo argued ignorance is evil's root. Modern society faces new injustices, like algorithmic bias in employment, recalling Javert's mechanical enforcement and urging vigilance against technological coldness. Hugo's light of hope shines today. Swedish activist Greta Thunberg, awakening global climate awareness, mirrors Gavroche's barricade songs, proving individual conviction can spark change. Les Misérables' universal value lies in inspiring us to choose love and action against injustice, like Jean Valjean following the candlestick's light. This is both a warning and a hope. Hugo calls us to confront injustice with love and action, illuminating humanity's light. Les Misérables is not just a literary classic but an eternal guide on humanity, justice, and hope, urging us to strive for a better world.